Welcome back, everyone. This is part 3 of my lecture on photosynthesis. And in this lecture, we will go over the Calvin cycle, light from air. In the light reactions, we saw how solar energy was converted into chemical energy, and there was two molecules. There was the energy molecule, which was ATP, and the electron carrier with the reducing power NADPH. Now with that, those two molecules, we can build stuff. So we are going to look at how the synthesis part and photosynthesis will occur during Calvin cycle. So to make sugars, the raw materials that would be required is carbon dioxide and the reducing power from NADPH. That will help us fix the carbon from the carbon dioxide and convert it into sugars. So carbon dioxide has very little chemical energy, and once it is reduced, it will contain a lot of chemical energy. It is an endergonic process, will require a lot of input of energy. And it cannot happen with a single step. There are multiple steps, small steps, which will each of these steps will have a specific enzyme that needs to catalyze the reactions. Energy from light reactions, ATP and NADPH, will be used to complete the Calvin cycle. This occurs in the stroma, and it requires the products from the light reaction in order to carry out these reactions in the stroma. So let's go over the Calvin cycle. One carbon dioxide will be attached to a 5-carbon molecule, RUBP, which stands for ribulose bisphosphate. And we'll have to do this with 3 molecules of each. So there will be 3 molecules of carbon dioxide, 1 carbon dioxide that will combine with 3 molecules of RUBP to form 3 molecules of a 6-carbon compound. This will be catalyzed by an enzyme called ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase, in short called Rubisco. This step is the first step of the Calvin cycle, also known as carbon fixation. This is carried out because of the presence of this specific enzyme, Rubisco, and the substrates being RUBP and carbon dioxide. Please do not confuse between RUBP and Rubisco. Rubisco is the enzyme, and RUBP being the substrate that is required to fix the 1 carbon dioxide. The 6-carbon compound immediately breaks down into 3-carbon PGA, phosphoglycerate. So 3 molecules of 6-carbon compound. Now we have 6 molecules of 3-carbon compound, which utilizes 6 ATPs and gets converted into another 3-carbon compound, which further undergoes reduction to form the 3-carbon glycerol 3p, glyceraldehyde 3p, which is also known as G3P in short. Out of the 6 G3Ps that are formed, 1 G3P molecule is used to make glucose, and the remainder of 5 G3P molecules, the 3-carbon molecules, are used to regenerate RUBP. It will utilize 3 ATPs. So 5 times 3 carbons is the same thing as 3 times 5 carbon molecules. So we are just keeping track of the carbons. We do not need to go into the details of the structure of those molecules or their specific names. The intermediates that one must know is the carbon dioxide coming in, and with every turn, so there has to be 3 turns of the Calvin cycle in order to make 1 G3P, and the 5 carbon RUBPs are regenerated at the end of the cycle. There's 3 parts to the cycle, the first part being carbon fixation, the second part being reduction, and the third and the last part of the cycle being regeneration of RUBP. So G3P was a molecule that was also an intermediate it was one of the 10 steps of glycolysis. We saw that G3P was produced, and then it was further reduced, and it produced ATP to produce pyruvate. And we see the exact opposite happening during photosynthesis. During Calvin's cycle, we see that G3P is an intermediate, and G3P is basically a molecule which can be used to make any other macromolecule. So it's the building block molecule. It's a 3 carbon sugar and also the end product of Calvin cycle. It's called the C3 photosynthesis because G3P is a 3 carbon molecule. So here we see how G3P can be used to make any of the other 4 macromolecules. Calvin cycle was possible, fixing of carbon was possible because of enzyme Rubisco. Rubisco stands for ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase. It is the most important enzyme in the world and also the most abundant enzyme because all plants, all photosynthetic organisms, all autotrophs have this enzyme in order to fix carbon. A little bit about the accounting of those carbons. Need to keep a track of those carbons. So each carbon dioxide has 1 carbon and each G3P has 3 carbons. So 3 turns of Calvin cycle. In each turn you will have 1 carbon being fixed. So the 3 turns of Calvin cycle will produce 1 G3P. Similarly, 6 turns of the Calvin cycle will produce 1 6-carbon glucose. To make 1 molecule of glucose, 18 ATPs and 12 NADPHs will be used. Any leftover ATPs from the light reactions will be used for other metabolic processes elsewhere by the cell, and it could be for any metabolic process such as other synthesis reactions or active transport, etc. Here is the the entire summary of photosynthesis. We see light reactions, what's produced, what's consumed, and what is the byproduct. And for the Calvin cycle also we need to know what's the input, what's the output, and it regenerates ADP and NADP. So putting it all together, this should be the diagram that covers it all. Carbon dioxide and water along with an input of light energy, an endergonic process prepares or makes 1 glucose and releases oxygen as a byproduct. So we have input of water and carbon dioxide, output of oxygen and sugars. So here is the big energy cycle. We see it cycles between 1 endergonic process, which is photosynthesis, It puts together carbon dioxide and water, gives out sugars and oxygen. That oxygen is going to be used during cellular respiration. Glucose will also be used for cellular respiration, which will release carbon dioxide and water. Summary of photosynthesis. You may pause this video and go over all these questions and see if you can answer them. Photosynthesis is the most important process on this planet, and it is solely responsible for all of the life that exists on this planet, including autotrophs and heterotrophs. It is responsible for the billions of tons of carbon dioxide that is fixed every year, and it synthesizes all of the organic molecules, the mass, the matter of all of the living things on this planet. A little bit of poetic perspective on this matter. So all of life, all of the living things, their solid material, the organic molecules that they are made up of, was basically built from thin air, and it was woven together by strands of sunlight. There are some variations on the theme of photosynthesis. Some plants had to evolve some strategies that helped them get more efficient with this process. Let us look at the leaf structure very briefly. And the cross-section of a leaf will show two layers. The upper layer is our palisade layer, compactly arranged cells. Lower layer is the spongy layer, and at the lower epidermis one would find the stomata. Stomata are openings on the undersurface side of the leaves, and they are used for transpiration and gas exchange. And these processes are very, very important for both photosynthesis and respiration. So on very hot days, to prevent water loss, plants have evolved adaptations to conserve their water. Stomata will close to conserve water. Also, there will be other adaptations that go on land plants to prevent water loss. But when stomata are closed, it could create problems. For example, when the stomata is closed, there will be oxygen buildup from the light reactions, and there will not be enough carbon dioxide to go through the Calvin cycle. So one of the best enzymes that we just talked about in photosynthesis, Rubisco. Evolution is not perfect. So when Rubisco evolved a long time ago, it evolved in an atmosphere where there was very low oxygen and very high carbon dioxide. And normally, when everything is going well, this enzyme fixes carbon. It reduces RUBP and builds sugars, and that is known as photosynthesis. However, when oxygen concentration becomes high, Rubisco starts bonding to RUBP along with oxygen. So, and oxygen being a competitive substrate, the oxidation of, instead of the reduction of RUBP, the plants end up oxidizing RUBP, breaking down sugars, and that is known as photorespiration. Photorespiration can be a very bad thing and could lead to breaking down of sugars. So here we see a typical Calvin cycle producing the C3 glucose molecule, but when oxygen is high, instead of carbon dioxide coming together or binding with 5-carbon RUBP, oxygen will bind to it. It will release carbon as carbon dioxide. It will not make energy. This process is called photorespiration. Whenever there's photorespiration, the plant is at a loss of carbons, loss of energy molecules, so ATP will be used instead of being made, and there will pretty much practically be no sugar. And if photorespiration could be reduced, then plants